Welcome back to another episode of the RAG Report podcast, where I bring you a daily bulletin show from leaders, suppliers, advisors to the global recruitment industry, helping us all get through COVID-19. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Sheffield, who's a regional director for Morgan McKinley in China. Originally from the UK, has worked in Australia and Asia Pacific, now based in Hong Kong. So he's going to give us a global view of what's going on, especially in the part of the world that has been hit earlier and seen this already. So Rob, it's 7:30 in the UK. I think it's mid-afternoon in Hong Kong. Thanks for taking the time.
Pleasure, thanks. Great to be talking.
Yeah, definitely. So Rob, I'll give you an intro there, mate, but just paint the picture. You're in Hong Kong. You're still, I can see in the background, you're still in the office. So what's going on for you?
So we're 3 months into COVID-19 now, and probably second wave. Up until sort of 2 weeks ago, we'd started phasing people back into the business. Prior to that, we'd all been on BCP plans and remote working, which we've, over the past 11 months, become, I think, experts in. And then gradually started to phase people back into the business on shifts, and then had full complement back in Hong Kong and Shanghai about 2 weeks ago. And then as the situation deteriorated elsewhere in the world, we started to increase a spike of cases back in Hong Kong. So we are now, bar a few of us, back to remote working and pretty much lockdown.
Wow. So let's go backwards. Let's take me to when this first kicked off for you, because I think you guys definitely were well ahead of us in the West. So when did you first hear about COVID-19 and what happened?
So we started to get updates and information, not on COVID-19, but on a virus of some sort in China early January. I was actually there for our end of year wrap with the team there, and at that point, travel advice was to be safe, to keep clean, to wear a face mask, which is not uncommon in Hong Kong or in Shanghai based on pollution levels and
previous diseases.
And we were looking at it, but there was nothing that would indicate the severity of certainly what was to come. Chinese New Year came early this year, so it was towards the end of Jan, at which point we were hearing more and more information around COVID-19 and the impacts, and we'd started to see communication around sort of limiting travel, certainly within China. And from there, over Chinese New Year, it just spiraled, at which point they put Wuhan on alert, they locked Wuhan down, they started to impose travel restrictions on people that had left Shanghai and were coming back. And you could see that the situation was starting to deteriorate there pretty quickly. I think to Hong Kong's credit, one of the things they did and have done extremely well, and this is, I think, obviously having gone through SARS in 2003, where Hong Kong was severely affected, was they took action immediately. So it was people on remote working pretty much straight away, face masks, contingency plans. Businesses in the sort of staffing sector, especially those with contractor books, were looking at obviously the communication around contractors and working from home. So it moved really quickly. And I think if you looked at the cases of COVID-19 in Hong Kong up until sort of the past week, it was below 300. So they did a really good job at containing it. The economic effects we'll experience over the next sort of 3, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond. But the actual locking down of that contagion in Hong Kong and in Shanghai and the provinces there was done very quickly.
So how did you manage it? How did Hong Kong manage it? Did they force you to be at home, stay at home, don't leave the house kind of attitude? What was the narrative?
No, I think the narrative here was that fundamentally you should stay at home. It didn't have to be as enforced as we've seen elsewhere, because they've been through this sort of over a decade and a half prior. So there was a government directive, all civil servants started working from home. We, as a community within the staffing industries, speaking to a number of colleagues in that space, and we automatically decided to put everyone on remote working. And people were vigilant. It didn't stop people going out and doing grocery shopping. It didn't stop people wandering out at the weekend, but there was obvious social distancing straight away. There were hand sanitizers, in social environments. As the seriousness increased, we saw all of the things that you're experiencing there: the panic buying of toilet rolls, the hand sanitizers running out. So we spiked in that sort of period, that sort of activity, probably a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
And things settled down. The actual communication now is probably more severe because we've seen triple the increase in cases. So they're trying to bring that back down into something that is something that they feel is more manageable, so that there are more stringent communications coming from, obviously, the government. You run the risk of being arrested if you are in a group of more than 4. So they are being very strict on it.
Yeah, I can imagine. The way China dealt with it, from what I've understood, is so militant, and I wonder whether we can even pull that off in the Western society.
I don't think there's many countries in the world where you could create the response that they created and have that level of control mechanism. I mean, I saw an article today about South Africa and how they're dealing with it, and obviously they've had serious exposure to Ebola and they've got the military involved. And so I think in certain ways you can, based on experience, people will expect a reaction. I think Europe and the US are a very different test case. I don't think you get away with, well, not even get away with it. I don't think you'd be able to enforce it based on how the political system works there.
So when you're going through this a month and a half ago, what were you, obviously family in England, friends in Australia, what were you thinking about the rest of the world's activity?
To be honest, we've taken, or certainly my view on it was that we didn't predict the spread as dramatically as it has happened. We knew there was risk. We were talking with the exec team in the business about contingency plans, looking at all the things that we as a business look at and that we know will be affected. So candidate interviews, face-to-face meetings. Did we have the setup for virtual conferencing? What were clients going to do? Hong Kong is a hub of multinational corporates that are largely headquartered out of Europe and the US. So the impact on those economies has a direct impact on hiring here. China, so we have a lot of multinational corporates there, but the scale of the SME business and local business is much bigger. So I don't think I was looking at the kind of behavior in the rest of the world, shaking my head at that point. I was looking at it going, it just demonstrated that maybe societally that we all live in our own little bubbles a little bit, and we do a lot more work on communication and sharing, and actually forewarned is a better way to be, right? Or pre-warned, should I say. So I think it got to the point towards the end of that month and a half where you then start to switch off to the press, because there are some really positive stories in the press about how people have dealt with COVID-19, what businesses are doing to create job stimuluses, what governments are doing in certain areas. But I feel on the whole, the press has been extraordinarily negative. And I think when you're on lockdown, as you all are in the UK, and we've been in Hong Kong, and you're sitting there staring at a news feed for 24 hours because you're Netflixed out. I'm talking the evenings. Obviously, you'd be trying to work in the day, right?
Yeah.
You're just being fed this negative cycle of news, and it becomes very difficult to break that pattern.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've just literally, so this, what is it, 7:30? I've been up since, I got up at 5:45 now, and I'm trying to get my exercise done before 7. Today I did it in the house, so I've got like a yoga mat out, and I've got doing like a bit of a circuit, and I'm listening to some podcasts that I listen to. And I've just put a post up on LinkedIn in the last 10 minutes, because one of the things in the podcast was all about, what is this teaching you? If you sit there and you just consume the news constantly, the narrative will chip away at you. And I'm not saying don't consume the news. I think you need to get your daily download of what the fuck's going on in the world. Like, you need that. It's reality check. But at the same time, turn it off and think, what's going on? I mean, I really, truly believe that this pandemic has taught me, one, as a business, that, we're pivoting things so fast now. We're probably moving at a pace we weren't faster in the last 2 weeks than we've done in the last 2 years. So it's sharpened up the blades, and I feel like the stuff that needed to happen. And then personally, like, I've got a small 2-bedroom flat that I live in, and I'm living with my wife, my dog. We're eating, sleeping, training, like we're working. Everything's happening in this small space, and we're eating everything out the cupboards. And I'm looking at my direct debit list like I'm in the business, and I'm thinking, what the fuck is this? Why have I got this? We've been consuming too much shit anyway. So I think for me, the lesson will be that I want to live a slightly more simple existence after this, and just keep things to a minimum. Hopefully not in a business sense, but in a personal sense.
Yeah.
I think it's important. If we go back to recruitment, Rob, set the scene. So a lot of people are just over here, we're in week 2 of working from home, and maybe week 3 for some people that push the button faster. Big organizations are the ones that seem to be struggling or having the biggest challenges because they've got so many people. They're slower to move. The clients can drop faster than their costs can drop. Morgan McKinley is a sizable organization. Before this, what did you guys look like in China and the regions?
Okay, so before, it's interesting that when you sort of talk through how organizations have reacted, because I've watched a number of your podcasts with people like Greg and Darren and the likes on, and they've all made excellent points. I think it's always going to come down to your judgment within the business around what you need to do at that point in time, what's best for the business and people, and then how does that manifest itself in a 3, 6, 9 month cycle moving forward. And then from a very blunt perspective, it's about P&L items, OPEX and cash flow. And so if I look at what we were like before COVID-19, I think that, from a China perspective, we have the same headcount currently as we were prior. And that doesn't mean that sorry?
How big is that?
At the moment, that's 44 people.
Okay.
In terms of sales staff. And that's not to say that we're not cost conscious. That's not to say that we might not make changes moving forward if the situation changes. But we look at everything on a country by country basis. And then obviously that feeds up into group, because the group is Morgan McKinley, and our responsibility is to ensure that our people are looked after and that the group is trading well. And then you look at it region by region, country by country. Hong Kong, we experienced a little bit of attrition post the first kind of COVID-19 experience that we had, and they were all expatriates leaving the country to go back to the likes of Canada, Australia, and there was one other place that we lost someone to. But I mean, the sad part was we saw some good people leave. The positive part was they didn't go to competitors, they went home. And I think when you put it into the context of COVID-19 in Hong Kong, it is slightly different because we've had sort of 10 months of protests. So we've had disruption and disruption and disruption. And to your point about what it's teaching sort of us as a business, I think we've rallied really, really well as a region and as a group in terms of how we've dealt with looking after people's emotional well-being, mental resilience, mental health care of our staff, and then combining that with being innovative around how do we work with our clients now. And to your point, our industry has always talked about change. It's always talked about disruption, and it's never really done that much. Yeah. And I think that, what we have demonstrated is that we can be quite agile. We've got a working from home model that works with all the problems that you address in terms of your average flat size in Hong Kong is about 350, 400 square feet. Yeah. A couple of generations of family in there. So it's not uncommon to be on a Zoom hangout where you're running a client development session and you see someone's grandma walk past in the background, and then you see their dad past in the background. Yeah. You adapt. So I think we cope with it really well. I think the headwinds that all sort of large, medium to large scale businesses now face is one around communication. If you're in multiple geographies, you've got multiple generations of people working with you. You've got different cultures working with you. So you've got to be very clear and precise in your communication, because saying something one way is interpreted completely differently by one person to another. The consistency in behavior, I think we've done really well in terms of what we've addressed with the businesses and the communication and the decisions we're making. And then I think it's around where's most affected. And the PMI results in China came out today, and they were, I think it was 54 or 58.8 versus a predicted 44, which is a hell of a bounce back. I mean, technically the end of the bear market in the short term. And I think that's the one thing that we're looking at the moment, going, the markets have priced through this. There's been volatility, but we've seen the market stabilize over the past 48 hours with all the stimulus that's been put in. So they'll recover quickly. It's now a question of how can the local economies recover quickly? How does the UK recover quickly? How does Ireland recover quickly?
How was your business in Hong Kong directly affected when you went into lockdown? Did clients stop hiring? Did they put freezes on things? How did that go?
No, they didn't stop hiring. What the immediate short term was a stall. So for the first week, it was very difficult to get hold of people, whether that was a procurement, HR, direct line perspective, decision maker. And two things happened there. We saw a lot of people say, you know what, we're going to take 2 weeks out, we're going to go on holiday, and we're just going to come back when this is settled down. And then the majority of people that were here were working from home. So we saw stall in the first week. By the second week, it had become the kind of new norm. And again, most businesses through the protests have been used to working remotely. So I don't think we necessarily had the lag and some of the stoppage that I've seen in certain other areas that are affected, because clients automatically flipped to VC interviewing. People automatically went on to remote, Google Hangouts or Zoom. Businesses were pretty well prepared for that. In terms of what we saw as we progressed through the process, we saw clients being more specific about hiring. Certainly, we saw a lot of the kind of mid to junior level roles put on hold to Q2 was the sort of common response. From a financial services perspective, certainly the investment banks were stopping in the short term with a view to picking things back up in Q2. We saw the tech side of the business and contracting, as you would expect in when you experience volatility, contracting and secondment goes up, and businesses are still hiring within the tech space. What we saw affected was predominantly manufacturing, as you would expect. Retail, e-commerce was up, but retail was flat. Pharma and medical was up. So businesses didn't put the brakes on. They just started to adjust their hiring plans and work out what were the significant hires, what did they need to bring in right now. So our job volume held pretty well. We experienced more volatility on the candidate side in terms of talent short markets attracting people to come into Hong Kong. Very difficult now with all the travel restrictions. And also people less likely to move in times of high volatility.
Yeah, exactly. Like why, if you're in a role, you've been there for a while, you feel safe and secure. Why would you move, right? So go back to so how's that evolved though? Because that was a month and a half ago, right? And this isn't going anywhere, in my opinion, anytime soon. We might have we're going to have peaks and troughs and ups and downs in the next few months. So what's going on right now in Hong Kong? US-based companies, European-based companies, or surely there's big waves of change coming?
Yeah, I think all the businesses we speak to are evaluating hiring plans, their cost base, their OPEX. So our job is to supply them with what we see in the market and the information that we have without breaching confidentiality, and ensure that it's a balanced view. So the past 2 weeks, we've experienced exactly what we thought we would experience, which was the pipeline of work was there. So we are rounding out those jobs and those roles. But we've seen a slowdown in new roles coming in, because previously this was a Hong Kong and China affected issue. It's now a global issue. So you can see the people who are monitoring the cost bases are shifting from being regional and local to global. And everyone's starting to go, right, if it's not a significant hire, then stop it for now. Do we need it? Do we want it? So a lot of our conversations throughout this period have been changing the narrative, ensuring that the people we're talking to know that we're human. Are they okay? How are they getting through this? What can we do to help them? That's from the candidate and client side. And then certainly from looking at it from the client's perspective, ensuring that the market share we know is there, we are positioned to take. So businesses still need to hire. They still need to create jobs. I've always said that, again, it's been interesting working in this region with groups of people that, I worked through 9/11, SARS, Lehman's, European debt crisis. So there's always something. And that's where we work out whether we're any good in terms of how we do our jobs and whether we add value. And for us, it's been a real focus on get everything back to basics in terms of make sure your process is really refined and solid. Make sure you are having the right conversations. And if you have to have 4 or 5 of them instead of 2 of them, then that's what you need to do, but with professionalism and empathy and integrity. So it's been hard work from keeping that kind of level of motivation.
How many of your team are quite junior in like year 1 of their recruitment career?
Less than 20%. Less than 20%.
Because that's the bit that I fear for at this point. Unless I think in the UK, a lot of businesses that can have furloughed their teams at that level, the 80% retention scheme. And I think, pardon me, one sec, I'm going to sneeze. Oh, we'll edit that out. I'll get JJ to edit that out. Just feel my nose going.
Right.
So, yeah, a lot of in the UK have furloughed people at that point. And I think it makes sense because, the way you're communicating what you're saying right now, you're able to have a conversation with a client, think further ahead, question them on OPEX and plans and and have a real empathetic conversation with your clients. Whereas someone in year 1 who's just thinking about learning how to do their job, they simply can't have that conversation. So what can they do? And I mean, to me, they'd be purely candidate based at this point, building that. But are you taking those? Have you got schemes like that in Hong Kong where you can put people on a retention package and kind of cut your costs for the short term?
No. So Hong Kong at the moment is probably one of the only countries that hasn't injected any stimulus into the economy. Singapore did last night. We saw Australia China have done a number of things, but Hong Kong no. And that's why if I look externally at the environment at the moment, we've seen a huge number of competitors cut very hard. And unfortunately, I would say probably 60% of those people cut are falling into the bracket that you describe. And that's not that they're not good. That's not that they're not hardworking. It's not that that they can't or won't be able to do the job. I think it comes down to, yes, there'll be some underperformance in there. Obviously, there'll be there will be some people that perhaps wouldn't have been right for the job or wouldn't have been able to do the job in a year's time. Yeah. But I think it comes down to organisations going, do they have the bandwidth in the current environment and the runway to train the people to get them to that level? So what we've done in a number of areas in Hong Kong with people like that is ensure that their direct managers are helping them have those conversations. So even on the kind of business development front at the moment, I always believe that being in front of a client is probably the most important thing that we do that adds value. So all of us are in front of clients virtually or on the phone. And if we've got consultants that we know, and it's interesting because there are cultural differences here and in China as well about those consultants feeling that they don't have the right to have that conversation. Whereas I think a lot of us are brought up to go, if you're good enough, irrespective of age. So we're doing a lot of work with them in that sense of supporting them. Okay, you don't feel you can speak to the managing director, you speak to your candidates that you've placed in there. I'll speak to the managing director. A very different size. If you look at some of the businesses that are cutting at that level, they're sort of 150, 200 people, and when we're not that size, which has been, I think, a huge sort of plus for us in terms of being agile.
Yeah, I think the bigger you are, the harder it's going to be. Like the David Higgins conversation that went out today was interesting about, when 9/11 hit in the US and you had like 300 people in the US, in America. You had a floor in San Francisco that was pumped the size of a football pitch. 12 months later had 4 people, right? And he took a year without a salary to build that back. I mean, it was a great story, and it's so true that everyone's got their own. I mean, like I say, I reach out. I really care for anyone who's going through this at the top as well as the bottom, because both have got tough decisions to make. In terms of China, then, so a lot of people in the UK are saying, China have bounced back. They're come through it now. Let's look at China as the model. They got it in 3 months. We'll get out in 3 months. Now, my opinion personally is it's very hard to model us on China because, one, they've got a bigger, like, self-serving economy, and two, they're more of a communist, like, controlled environment. So they were able to force things. Like I read about, people turned up at your door with a thermometer, and if you went over the temperature, you were basically taken away and put into a hospital. And we couldn't do that here. So give me what you understand to be the situation in China right now.
So I think my understanding is, in terms of Shanghai, certainly, is that we're business as usual. If I look at sort of our forecasting and our job volumes, it's back up to where it was pre-Corona-19. We have made changes in terms of the approach. We are doing far more, the concentration is far more on SMEs at the moment. And from an FS sector, that's completely different, because a number of the Chinese banks are continuing to hire. They see it as a market share grab. So it hasn't been as affected there as somewhere like, for example, Sydney or the UK. Singapore is another good example of how well they've dealt with COVID-19 and what they've done in terms of travel restrictions. And I think to answer your question, at the moment, we are back to business as usual in China. We don't know whether we'll have a bounce back there, because they've locked their borders, they've restricted international tourists from going in. So they have, to your point, I think there's very few countries in the world, maybe Russia could do it, where you can just lock down everything. And the people, and I know our staff, for example, were all trying to, all working remotely, which is difficult because unless you've got a VPN, you can't get online. But they were all rigid in terms of self-isolation. They didn't deviate from it at all. And I think that's partly a question that we need to ask ourselves in terms of if the UK were to bounce back out of this in 3 months' time, or Ireland, do they culturally have that mentality to do that? It's all very well and good being told, you've got to self-isolate, you've got to stay away from this for the next 2 weeks, and it's a sunny day on Sydney, so you head down to Bondi because you think you're going to be the only person there, and then there's 30,000 people, or you step out for 20 minutes to go see a few mates. That just didn't happen there. It just stopped. So I think the way that they have managed to contain it is just through rigid control.
Yeah. And so their economy is back to normal apart from international trade and movement. So they're basically just, everything's insular within China right now.
Yeah. As far as we know, it's back to normal, because that's the numbers they give us, right? But from someone that sees the business on the ground there and is talking to that business every day, all indications are that we are busy. The job volume's there, the candidate activity's there in slightly different areas. And again, we know manufacturing will be slow there for a little bit until that picks back up. We know that retail will be slow from a multinational corporate perspective there. But and it's the scale of the market, isn't it? So it's when the US bounces back, it bounces back big because the scale is vast. There is just so much business there. When you think about Shanghai, and then you think about Guangzhou, Shenzhen, the Macau Bay area, and that's tiny compared to the scope of what's available.
Yeah.
It's just the volume that's there.
Yeah, so they've got an opportunity within their own nation to build back up, whereas we rely so much on other businesses, other countries, and the trade, etc.
Yeah, and I think the UK, to the same extent, similar to Hong Kong in terms of Hong Kong's had 11 months of protests. You've had, I forget how many years of Brexit. So there's been all this backdrop, and now this. So I think I'd like to see it bounce back in 3 months. Yeah, I'd love to believe it could. It would be fantastic, and I think everyone wants it to. It's just a question of whether culturally.
I think we'll have again, I'm only going off what I'm understanding from information I'm sourcing, but I think we'll have a semi bounce back in sort of August, September, and people will start going back to work. And then I think we'll have a second wave because the one narrative I'm not hearing on the news ever is about stopping the virus. It's all about containing. It's all about control. It's all about reducing the curve, flatten the curve. But to me, then it's like a fire with embers. As soon as you put oxygen back into it, it's going to come out. So as soon as you release everyone back into the market, it's going to be a second wave. But again, a bit like you guys, you were prepared for this based on previous epidemics. When we go into lockdown next time, it won't be the same impact. People will be ready. They'll turn their stuff back on. It should be a smoother existence rather than what's gone on over the last 2 weeks. It's been insane. Okay, Rob, look, I think that's all we've got time for. I mean, look, thanks so much for taking the time, mate. I know you've been listening, and you're well connected out there. So it's great to get a viewpoint of what's going on. It is good to hear that China are the job ratios are back up and there's stuff happening, and we've all got to be optimistic that we can get that back. Otherwise, what's the point? It's a little bit. Yeah. So if anyone on who's listening is wants to reach out to you on LinkedIn, are you open for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, wicked. So I'll tag you and everything. Please do get in touch with Rob. And guys, that's another episode of the RAG Report coming to you today from Hong Kong and East London. I'll be back again tomorrow. I don't ask for any fee on this. I just ask for you to share it. So get it out to more people. Pass it to your friends, your colleague, your boss, whoever, your competitors. Because together we're going to get through this, and we're going to learn from information, and everyone's input will help us on a daily basis. So I'll be back again tomorrow with more stories. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.